A shipment of gold from Burkina Faso worth hundreds of millions of dollars was seized at a European port. No legal case, no accident. It was politics. Under direct pressure from Washington, the containers never reached their destination. And then came Trump's voice, sharp and unapologetic. If Africa wants access to global markets, it must pay its dues. In Ouagadougou, the news hit like an earthquake for President Ibrahim Traoré. This was not business, it was robbery. The gold mined by his people, the very wealth meant to fund schools, hospitals, and food security, had been turned into collateral for debts dictated by outsiders. Crowds filled the streets. Anger spread more quickly than fire. They steal in broad daylight and call it law, one man exclaimed at a protest. The reality was clear. If Africa's gold could be halted and confiscated, then sovereignty itself was being attacked. What began as a single shipment seized at a port was about to ignite a battle over Africa's right to control its own future. The seizure was not a mistake. It was strategy. In Washington, Trump framed it as a lesson to the Sahel. If they want the benefits of global trade, they must honor their debts. Behind the cameras, officials admitted the truth. This was about the IMF. For decades, Africa's loans had been tied to conditions written in Washington and Paris. The International Monetary Fund demanded repayment in dollars backed by guarantees. But as African nations like Burkina Faso pivoted towards new partners in BRICS and India, the West became anxious. What if those loans were not repaid? What if Africa chose to abandon the system entirely? Trump's response was harsh. Hold the gold by pressuring Europe to seize Burkina Faso's shipment. Washington sent a message. Your resources are collateral. Whether you agree or not, the logic was cold but clear. If Africa tried to shift away from the IMF, its most valuable asset would be frozen before leaving port in Ouagadougou. The revelation spread quickly. Ministers told Traoré the gold had been classified as security against outstanding debt. Debt that in many cases had been inherited from past regimes or forced through under colonial terms. Debt that had already taken more than it ever provided to the people. It was the ultimate insult. A farmer interviewed on local radio said, "We never signed those loans. Why should our gold pay for them?" A teacher added, "If they keep our gold, they are keeping the future of our children." Traoré stood before his cabinet and spoke plainly. This is not about debt. This is about control. If they succeed, Africa will never own its tomorrow. The seizure had achieved its purpose in Washington, but in Africa, it was fueling something much more dangerous. Unity. If you believe Traoré's courage is the voice of Africa, share your thoughts in the comments. The streets of Ouagadougou erupted with anger, not confusion, anger. The news spread through radios, WhatsApp groups, and loudspeakers in the markets. The gold was not stolen by pirates nor delayed by storms. It was seized deliberately as collateral for debts tied to the IMF. Mothers who had struggled to buy bread shouted in protest, "Whose gold is it? Ours or theirs?" Youths carried signs that read, "Our gold is not your guarantee." The outrage was not only about money, it was about betrayal. The realization that the wealth of Africa was still treated as property in someone else's vault. Inside the presidential palace, Traoré gathered his closest advisors. Some urged diplomacy. "We can try to negotiate for its release," one minister nervously suggested. "Propose repayment plans as a compromise," but others disagreed. The room was heavy with silence until Traoré rose. His voice was calm but sharp. "They want us to bow. They want us to pay debts we did not choose. With gold we have mined with our blood. If we bend today, there will be nothing left to stand on tomorrow." His words rippled through the chamber. For the first time, the cabinet understood this was not just a financial dispute. It was an attack on sovereignty itself. Meanwhile, protests swelled. Miners marched from the goldfields carrying tools aloft as symbols of resistance. Students organized sit-ins at universities, calling for Burkina Faso to completely break its dependence on the IMF. Even soldiers were heard muttering in the barracks, "If they can take the gold, what will they take next?" Western media framed it differently. Of course, CNN called Truss European commentators spoke of African instability. But inside Africa, the narrative was changing. The people did not see recklessness, they saw defiance. And in that defiance, Ibrahim Traoré sensed an opening. The seizure had been meant to humiliate Burkina Faso. Instead, it was uniting a continent around a single truth. Africa's wealth could no longer be entrusted to foreign hands. The crisis had reached its breaking point. For days, newspapers in Burkina Faso ran a single headline: Gold seized. Nation betrayed. Radio hosts kept repeating Trump's words, Africa must pay its dues, until they sounded like a permanent challenge. The West believed it had forced Africa to its knees. But Ibrahim Traoré had different ideas. He summoned an emergency session with leaders of the Alliance of Sahel states. Malian responded immediately, sending envoys to Ouagadougou. Their message was simple: your gold is our fight too. Around the table, frustration burned. Each country had stories of shipments delayed, reserves frozen, or contracts rewritten at the stroke of a foreign pen. The seizure was not an isolated act. It was part of a system. Traoré laid out the reality. They are holding our gold because they understand it is our source of strength. They label it as collateral. I refer to it as ransom. And if we agree to this, the demands for ransom will be perpetual. The room fell silent. Then a minister from Mali broke it. What if we stop sending gold through their ports? What if we keep it here in Africa? Heads turned. For the first time, a radical thought became a real possibility. Build an African reserve beyond the reach of IMF or European treasuries. Outside, momentum was building. Protesters didn't just demand the gold's release. They demanded change. Youth groups painted murals showing Africa's resources chained to Western banks. Farmers pledged to contribute to a people's fund that would back any move toward financial independence. Western governments dismissed the talk as fantasy. One European official scoffed. They don't have the infrastructure or the unity. But what they underestimated was the one resource Africa had in abundance: determination. And at the heart of that determination was Ibrahim Traoré, ready to turn a scandal into the first step toward liberation. The proposal was bold, almost unthinkable. An African gold reserve created and guarded on African soil out of the reach of Paris, Brussels, or Washington. For decades, such an idea had been dismissed as a dream. Now, following the humiliation at the European port, it appeared less like a fantasy and more like a necessity for survival. In the meeting hall, debate erupted. Some ministers warned of disaster. If we break from the IMF, sanctions will crush us, argued one delegate. Another cautioned, without Western insurance, our exports will stall. Our economies could suffocate. Fear lingered in every corner of the room. But Traoré cut through the noise. They already suffocate us. Did the IMF save us when reserves were frozen? Did sanctions feed our people? No. They steal with one hand and offer loans with the other. Enough, his voice brought stability to the room. Support quickly followed. The representative from Niger stood and said, our uranium belongs to them only because we allow them to ship it. Why shouldn't we protect it ourselves? Mali's minister added. We have watched for years as our gold left our soil only to fund their banks. If this is the moment to stop, then let it be now. Beyond the walls, the message spread. News outlets across Africa began to talk openly about the gold reserve. Analysts explained how pooling resources could shield the Sahel from currency manipulation. On the streets, people chanted, keep the gold, build the vault. The idea had taken root in Europe. Alarmed Balsang financial newspapers warned of dangerous populism behind closed doors. Memos portrayed the project as a danger to the stability of global markets. Yet the more it was condemned, the more it gained legitimacy in Africa. For the first time in generations, African leaders were not reacting to the West. They were planning for themselves. And Traoré knew even the hint of unity could change the balance of power forever. The decision could no longer remain talk. Traoré ordered his economic advisors and military chiefs to draft the first concrete steps. The plan was simple in principle, but revolutionary in practice. stop sending gold through European ports, and begin building the infrastructure to keep it within Africa. Meetings were held in secret locations. Engineers outlined how vaults could be constructed in secure zones, reinforced with military protection. Economists devised a plan for how reserves from Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger could be combined into a single stock, forming the basis for an African financial defense. But Traoré knew this was not just about concrete walls or ledgers. It was about trust. At a gathering of AES leaders, he spoke directly. If we build this vault, it will not belong to Burkina Faso, nor Mali, nor it will belong to Africa. Our children must know that their wealth is stored where no foreign hand can touch it. The words carried weight. For decades, mistrust between neighbors had kept cooperation fragile. Yet the image of gold being seized overseas had burned a scar deep enough to unite them. On the ground, preparations started. Special units were tasked with guarding gold convoys within national borders. Contracts with Western refineries were quietly reevaluated and, in some cases, terminated. Negotiations commenced with partners in BRICS to supply refining technology directly to the Sahel. Western intelligence picked up signals of the shift. Reports warned that if the African gold reserve became real, it could undermine IMF leverage across the continent. Officials debated whether to tighten sanctions or attempt quiet diplomacy. Neither option looked promising. In Ouagadougou, Traoré stood before a small crowd of miners and told them plainly, "You are not digging for Paris. You are not digging for Washington. From now on, your work will build Africa's strength." The applause was thunderous. The reserve was still just an idea on paper, but in the hearts of the people, it was already a reality. The West did not wait quietly. Within days of the AES announcement, European financial institutions began to strike back. Banks in Paris and Brussels froze transactions linked to Burkina Faso and its allies. Insurance companies suddenly refused coverage for shipments, leaving West Africa. Even humanitarian aid shipments were delayed for review. The message was clear. Resistance would come at a price. Trump, never one to soften his words, doubled down. At a press conference, he declared, "These young leaders think they can defy the rules. But if Africa wishes to have a seat at the table of global trade, it must first learn to adhere to the law." To him, the law was IMF contracts and dollar dominance. Anything else was chaos. Western media amplified the narrative. Newspapers called the African gold reserve a reckless gamble. Talk shows labeled Traoré too young, too dangerous. Analysts warned of famine, instability, even state collapse. It was psychological warfare designed to scare the people back into obedience. But in Ouagadougou, the opposite happened. The more the West threatened, the more the people rallied. Demonstrations filled the streets with chants of "Our gold, our Africa." Farmers offered to give a portion of their harvest to back the reserve. Students shared viral messages online. If they are this afraid of it, then it must be our only path forward. Traoré understood the stakes. He gathered his generals and advisors. They will starve us, smear us, and isolate us. But they cannot break us unless we let them. This is not about gold anymore. This is about freedom itself. The reaction in the West was one of disbelief. They had expected fear. Instead, they had awakened something far more dangerous: conviction. The countermeasures escalated quickly. European regulators announced new trade restrictions, making it nearly impossible for Sahel states to sell gold or other minerals on Western markets. Cargo ships. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome again to my channel. Today we look at the sad state of Paris, a city once called the center of Europe, but now burning with the anger of its own people. Thousands of citizens are on the streets every day, blocking roads, setting institutions on fire, and clashing with the police. The chants are loud, the smoke is rising, and their message is clear. Macron must go. For decades, France survived by eating the food of Africa, using the wealth of Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso to fuel its economy. Uranium from Niger kept its nuclear plants alive. Gold and cotton from Mali fed its industries. Resources from Burkina Faso kept its banks strong. France labeled this progress as civilization. However, the reality was that France's survival came at a great cost to Africa. Yet the situation has dramatically shifted since 2022. France was expelled from the Sahel. One by one, Mali said no. Niger said no. Burkina Faso said no. They closed the doors, cut the chains, and told Paris that Africa would no longer serve as its life support. France believed it could return within a few months, that new agreements would be made, but 2 years have passed and the door is still closed. Today, the French economy is gasping for air and the empire is choking on its own weakness. France's leaders know the truth, but will not say it openly. The nation is drowning in debt over $3.3 trillion that grows by thousands every second. Unemployment is climbing. Operations have ceased for 57 companies. A pair of nuclear facilities are inactive due to the disruption in the supply of affordable uranium from Niger. The government has declared spending reductions because of an overwhelming budget deficit, cuts that include freezing pensions, slashing services, and reducing support to citizens. This is where the anger grows deepest. Retirees who worked all their lives now see their pensions frozen. Families who depend on public services see them shrinking. Workers face inflation, higher bills, and low wages. Poverty is rising. Inequality is sharp. And yet the government continues to protect the elites while the ordinary people carry the burden. And at the center of the storm stands President Emmanuel Macron. To the French people, he has become the symbol of arrogance, the face of betrayal. They perceive him as an individual disconnected from the everyday lives of citizens. He seems more preoccupied with international conflicts and speeches on the world stage than the hardship of his own people. The frequent turnover of prime ministers, unfulfilled pledges, and speeches that fail to provide tangible relief have all contributed to this sentiment. All of this has made the people lose faith in him. Now the protests no longer shout for reforms. They no longer shout for higher wages only. They shout for his resignation. The banners carried on the streets say it clearly. Macron, step down. Brothers and sisters, the empire that once stood tall is now trembling. France thought it could survive without Africa, but the truth is written in the smoke of its streets. Africa has cut the lifeline, and the French citizens are now paying the price. They cannot eat promises. They are unable to pay their bills with rhetoric. They find it impossible to illuminate their homes without a source of uranium. The public's anger is no longer restrained. It is no longer polite. It is raw. It is fierce. It is fire. And when citizens rise in such numbers, governments shake. Brothers and sisters, if you walk through the streets of France today, you will not hear the sound of laughter or music. You will hear the heavy sound of marching feet, of drums beaten in anger, of voices raised against a system that no longer serves the people. Paris, Lyon, Marseille, Bordeaux. Every city is now filled with protests. They block highways. They ignite fires in public structures. Their demonstrations continue day and night as they refuse to be silenced. Law enforcement is present everywhere, clad in armor, holding shields, and prepared with tear gas. But even with all their power, they cannot silence the crowds. For every protester pushed back, 10 more rise from the corners. For every barricade broken, another one is built. The air smells of smoke. The ground is stained with fire. And the people are shouting one name louder than all others: Macron. The workers shout for better wages. They say they cannot live on crumbs while prices rise every month. Inflation has eaten their salaries. What once bought food for a week now barely buys food for 3 days. The price of gas, electricity, and bread continues to increase, while their income stays the same. Retirees are protesting against the freeze on their pensions. They dedicated their entire lives to working and fulfilling their obligations. And now, in their old age, the government tells them their money will be locked. They march with sticks in their hands and fire in their hearts, saying, "We will not suffer silently."